been studying through the book of Exodus these past few months. As is often the case around here, it seems what I had hoped would be, maybe about 3 months of lessons has blossomed into closer to 6. Probably will be closer to 7. Perhaps that's because I talk too much. That is a possibility. I'd prefer to think it's just that there's so much good stuff, there's no possible way we could get through. That is a much more pleasing perspective for me, at least. We've been working these past, really the last 2 weeks. We've arrived at Sinai. We've seen the Lord giving the 10 Commandments to Moses and thereby to the people in Exodus chapter 20. We saw the people's response to the giving of that law, the shame, the grief, the fear that came with that. And we saw the Lord's honoring of their response. God said, hey, the things that these people are saying are good. And we talked a little bit about how we tend to be real downers on the children of Israel in the Old Testament. Our focus tends, how many times do we complain about their complaining in the book of Exodus, as if we are way more enlightened and spiritual than they were. We really tend to focus on these negative events, and yet here you have the people of God receiving the law from the Lord, responding to it, and God saying, you know what, that's absolutely right. What you're doing is correct. You do need a mediator. You have failed to meet my expectations, and you rightly recognize and experience the shame that should come out of that. And God honors them for that. And he then begins to elaborate on some of these laws he's given. Now, those 10 Commandments, probably one of the few passages of Scripture that the world at large would still recognize as Scripture. When you start saying thou shalt nots, even people who are outside the church who really have no heart for the things of God, they kind of scratch their heads and go, oh, that's a Bible thing, right? Something to do with some guy named Moses and a mountain and so on and so forth. There's still some broader awareness of these things. But God then elaborates in chapters 21 through 23, where we ended last week, on taking some of these commandments and making a broader, fuller application of those commandments to the people's lives. We talked, as we worked through the 10 Commandments themselves, we talked a good deal about how God would apply these to people's lives and how Jesus would elaborate on these commandments. He would draw them out. And we touched back to our study last year of the Sermon on the Mount and really talked about how each one of these commandments Christ elaborated on, not in the way people expected, not in the Pharisaical way that he was dealing with during his time, but in really diving into the heart of these commandments, the spirit of them, and what God intended for us. We also talked a bit about how these commandments represent, while they're being codified by God, they largely represent the natural law of the universe that God has woven into the very fabric of the universe. You don't have to be a believer. You don't have to be a Christian to experience the benefits of not killing, not stealing, not coveting, not committing adultery. If you're an unbeliever, if you were here today or you're watching by the live stream and you're like, I don't know anything about Jesus and this God of the Bible, but you choose to live your life by those principles, you will reap some rewards from that. Because God has designed the universe in such a way that if you live by these precepts, you get benefits. You get to enjoy things from that. And that's how societies, civilizations, peoples who reject Jesus Christ, who, if they die in their sins and they have not put their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, they will be burning in hell. But here on this earth, they can reap benefits from obeying God's commandments, just as we see here. So God elaborated on these commandments and provided some applications. And we worked through many of those last week. We talked about rules that he set for theft and property damage and honesty and dealing with others. We didn't really work through every single precept, but we touched on individual areas and concepts, some of which have made their way all the way to our present time. And we talked a little bit about those rules about having an ox that gores people or hurts other animals. And we talked about how it's very, very similar to modern law about dog bites. Every dog gets one bite, right? You don't know your dog's gonna bite people, and it bites someone, but if it happens a second time, that dog's gonna get put down. There's consequences that come with that. If you don't control your dog who's bitten people, there's consequences that come with that. And just thousands of years ago, people were dealing with the same issues, and we haven't figured out a way to improve on that law. We haven't figured out a way to make it any better. We still use pretty much that exact same principle. We didn't work through all of chapter 23, but we're not going to dwell too much on that today. If we were to work through the rest of chapter 23, there's really a couple of sections we didn't spend a good deal of time dwelling on. One was in chapter 23, starting in verse 10, where God takes that law of the Sabbath and begins to apply it to the land, the animals, the vineyards, and the fields. And when you think about that, it really is an amazing thing that Jesus has to come back later and say, hey, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Right here, God has laid down, the Sabbath is even made for the beasts of the field, for the land itself to get its rest. Very much a creation principle. And then that section closes in chapter 23, starting in verse 20, where God sets some ground rules about the conquest they are about to go through, about how God is going to give them the land. He's going to make them successful. He's going to send his angel before them to prepare the way for them, to put the fear of him and of the people in the peoples of the land who are being judged for their iniquity. And we've talked about that in the past, how Scripture says the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full, that God, even as the children of Israel are going through their captivity in Egypt, those peoples who are in the land of Canaan, who do have some revelation of God, and we saw several examples of that throughout the book of Genesis, about how these people who are not of the Abrahamic covenant, who are not of the Abrahamic line, they had awareness of the God of the universe, and they either accepted or rejected. And God says those people's iniquity has yet to be fulfilled. But when the children of Israel come and they drive those people out of the land, they'll be performing God's judgment on those people for their iniquities. So God gives them kind of this preview of what that conquest is going to be like, what they're going to go through. Remember, they haven't rejected God yet. They haven't disobeyed God yet. So they haven't yet been sentenced to their 40 years of wilderness wanderings. The plan is still for them to go in and take the land as God intends. And so what is the result of this? What is the response? We'll begin today in Exodus chapter 24, starting in verse 1. And he, this is the Lord talking, said unto Moses, Come up unto the Lord, thou and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship ye afar off. And Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but they shall not come nigh, neither shall the people go up with him. And Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words which the Lord hath said will we do. And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord and rose up early in the morning and builded an altar under the hill. Remember God's response when the people showed that shame, that awareness that they could not fulfill the law, that they could not obey the commands of the Lord. What did God do? God said, hey, this is how you build an altar. This is how you commune with me. Well, that's pretty important because Moses is building an altar. Moses builded an altar under the hill and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the children of Israel, which offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen unto the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people. And they said, all that the Lord hath said will we do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, behold the blood of the covenant, which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words. What words? The words of the book of the covenant, which Moses has read, presumably these last few chapters that we have worked through, and the words of the people in responding to that in faith and saying, what the Lord has said, we will do, we will obey. And with these events, the covenant between them is ratified. I think it's noteworthy, the group of people who are involved in what will be one of the most awe-inspiring passages of Scripture that sneaks up on you here in chapter 24. Note the people who are at the heart of this event in verse 1. Thou, Moses, he's a pretty important guy. You expect him to be involved in a lot of this stuff, right? And Aaron, well, we kind of know he's going to be the high priest. He's Moses' brother. He's been around through all this. He's been the spokesperson of Moses as appointed by God. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right? Nadab and Abihu. Boy, we haven't seen a whole lot about them. Seems like they're kind of newcomers on this. But we kind of know the rest of the story with Nadab and Abihu, right? They're going to become pretty infamous. I almost said important, but infamous is probably a better term. They're the oldest sons of Aaron. Now, the priesthood hasn't been established yet. We haven't been through that yet, right? But they're being brought along for the events of chapter 24. And then 70 of the elders of Israel. So we don't get all their names and details, but presumably they're representing the people in their role as elders. So they're gathered together. They're at some intermediate point. They're not going to go up in the mountain and talk to God like Moses is. They are, as verse 1 ends, worshiping ye afar off. Moses returns with them to the people. They perform these sacrifices. It says the young men of the children of Israel offered these burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings. Again, the priesthood hasn't been established yet. Perhaps they were young Levites, but we're not really told all those details. But they sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings, not sin offerings, mind you. We're going to talk about that more later. Burnt offerings and peace offerings. They are in a state of communion with God, and God is going to honor that and show them this. Chapter 24, verse 9, then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. So this special group that is taken out from the people, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of a sapphire stone, and as it were, the body of heaven in his clearness. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. Also they saw God, and did eat and drink. And the Lord said unto Moses, come up to me into the mount, and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone, and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. And Moses rose up, and his minister Joshua, and Moses went up into the mount of God, and he said unto the elders, tarry ye here for us, until we come again unto you, and behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come unto them. And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it 6 days, and the 7th day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. And the sight of the glory of the Lord was like devouring fire on the top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up into the mount. And Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. when we talk about the book of Exodus and we think of kind of those stories that come top of mind, you undoubtedly think of Moses and the burning bush. You undoubtedly think of the actual events of the Exodus, of the departure part, the plagues, Pharaoh and his hard heart, the crossing of the Red Sea. You think of them coming to Mount Sinai and Moses getting those tables of stone, which hasn't even happened yet. But I suspect an underappreciated part of this whole story has occurred right here in this short section here. Just a very short time ago, in Exodus, that would be about Exodus 2019, the people were shown their sin, and they said, no man can talk to God and live. No man can speak with God. Moses, be a mediator for us. We can't stand before this presence. We can't have anything to do with this. We're not adequate. And God said, they're right. You're absolutely right. You're not adequate. You do need this. But now in this time, as they have heard the words of the law, as they have ratified this covenant, they have agreed to obey the Lord. They, through their leaders, are given this glimpse of the glory of God. And they are in communion with God. Mankind has not sat and eaten with God and communed with him in this way since the Garden of Eden. Mankind will not sit and commune with God in this way until the advent of Jesus Christ himself. This is a singular thing that has happened here, and they have experienced it together. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and these 70 elders, they have glimpsed God. We're not told his exact form. We're told things about him. But they have seen him there, and they didn't just see and fall down on their faces dead, as others will, but they ate and drank. They communed and fellowshiped together with the God of the universe. What a grand and glorious thing. What a thing of God's intent. God has always wanted this. He wants to commune with mankind. He walked with Adam and Eve in the garden in the cool of the day. That is what he has desired. And it has ever been man's prerogative, man's capacity, man's tendency to reject that communion. And this is the children of Israel's moment of living like Adam and Eve, dwelling with God in the cool of the day. And just as quickly as Adam and Eve threw away what they were given, we know the rest of the story, right? We know that by the time Moses comes down off that mountain, they will have thrown it all to the wind. We know that Aaron is going to craft gods for them, even under the very presence of the God of the universe. It won't last long, and we shudder to think of someone throwing this away. But just as we're very quick to say, you know what, if we'd been Adam and Eve, we wouldn't have done that. No, you would have. You would have. And an example of that truth is folded right into this very story. Because we know what's going to happen with Nadab and Abihu, right? We know that these people who are there, who are called out by name, who experience this singular event in all of the history of mankind, certainly easily analogous to the transfiguration on the Mount or being in the Garden of Eden, what these men are experiencing. They're there. They're going to be appointed as priests, first among the priests, the eldest children of the high priest. But you know, there is no amount of revelation that guarantees faith and obedience. There isn't. Thousands of years later, Jesus is going to tell a story. He's going to tell a story about a rich man and a man named Lazarus. And in that story, if you'll recall, what does the rich man say as he's in his torment? He says, Father Abraham, send Lazarus to go speak to my brothers so that they don't experience what I'm experiencing. And Abraham says, they have Moses and the prophets. What else do they need? And he says, but if someone rose from the dead, they'd believe. And what does Abraham say? Nah. They have Moses and the prophets. They won't listen to him. Can you imagine how Abraham must have felt about this guy complaining about Revelation? When he's saying they have Moses and the prophets, Abraham is saying they have stuff I didn't have. I didn't have Moses and the prophets. I didn't have God on the mount talking to me like this. I didn't have all these things. What are you complaining about, buddy? You had so much more. And what does he take from that? No. Someone raise him from the dead isn't going to change them. Because there is no amount of revelation that will do that. Judas walked with the Son of God for 3 years. That didn't do it for him. We have always had the gift and the risk, the responsibility of free will. And it is a cold, hard truth that some people will have the truth right in front of their face and they will reject it. You know, this week, the online algorithm, you know, it knows how to pick our brain and find out what we like to see. It showed me an article about a hummingbird, a woodpecker. It was a woodpecker. And evidently, I didn't go fact check this thing, but it seemed reasonable. Evidently, a woodpecker's tongue is incredibly long. It actually goes back in its head and around its brain. And the presumed reason it does that is that it insulates the brain, it cushions the woodpecker's brain as it's tapping on things because it does it so hard. And so it actually forms like this cushion around this thing's brain. But the headline around this article was like, one of the most amazing natural adaptations is this the way this woodpecker's tongue is. And it never ceases to blow my mind the contortions people will make to avoid acknowledging design. We're not even talking about full-fledged faith in the God of the Bible here. It's just people looking at something that is so obviously designed and saying, what an amazing natural adaptation. What an amazing chance. What a the Bob Ross happy little accident that this woodpecker's tongue wraps around its brain to protect it so it can peck at things and make holes in our soffits on our houses. It is a mind-blowing thing that people will look the truth directly in the eye and deny it exists. But we will do it. And lest we get too mocking in our recognition of this fact, church family, every time we choose to do wrong, we do the exact same thing. Every time we do something and we say, well, I know I should, but whatever, you know. I was tired. I was hungry. I was in a bad mood. Whatever the case may be, you look truth in the eye and you reject it. Just as much as the person who somehow thinks that woodpecker just happened to get lucky and have a tongue that wraps around its brain. We do the exact same thing when we look the truths of God in the eye and we say, not this time. Next time I'll get around to it. Yeah, I know, but we do the exact same thing. Nadab and Abihu, they're here, they're seeing all of these things, and yet they will progress on, and they will choose to do that which the Lord has not commanded, and they will offer strange fire before the Lord and be destroyed because of it. I believe it is a very purposeful thing that God calls their names out here. It doesn't just say Aaron and his oldest sons, Moses and some of his family and 70 of the elders of Israel. It doesn't say that. It wants us to know these people were here, but wait, there's more. Despite their being here, they will reject this God they have seen in as stark a manner as Aaron will when he starts crafting calves out of gold at the bottom of the mountain. So Moses has built God an altar. This covenant has been ratified. These people have communed with God in a unique, unprecedented way. They have seen God in a way mortal man has rarely experienced. And yet we know what's coming. We know they will reject him. But that hasn't happened yet. Moses is called upon to go up to the mountain. And he's going to receive some more commands from God. The next several chapters that we'll work through over the next couple weeks are going to deal with the instructions given around the building of the tabernacle. Now, included in that is the ark, of course, the mercy seat, the laver, the altar, all of those parts and pieces in the tabernacle construction. We'll spend a good deal of time talking about some of the pictures in that. All of these passages, and we've just, I feel like we've just scratched the surface as we're working through all these things. There are so many pictures and types to be seen in God's dealings with mankind. Because even though if we were reading through the book of Exodus for the first time, we wouldn't know what's coming with Nadab and Abihu, and we'd be shocked when we find out what happens. God's never shocked, right? God does know what's going to happen. He knows these people are going to be disobedient. He knows they're going to murmur and dispute and cause problems. He knows what's coming. And he has designed things with a plan and a picture for us to better understand him, his nature, his character, and his dealings with mankind. And so we're going to see that through the giving of the instructions around the ark and the design of the ark and the tabernacle together there. But as is often the case, there are layers of meaning. And from a very practical perspective, God is in this covenant with the children of Israel. He's told them how to make an altar. And there's much significance to altars. We saw that all throughout the book of Genesis. The children of Israel, they know a thing or two about altars. They have seen altars in their history. There is meaning there. There's a familiarity with the concept of an altar and sacrifice to the Lord. There's nothing new about building an altar and sacrificing to the Lord. Their forefathers have done this. But now God is going to establish for them a national altar, a place where they, as the Israeli, as the Hebrew nation, will come and commune with God, will offer those sin offerings, the things we haven't seen yet, but we know are going to be pretty important and are going to be pretty typical of what Christ is doing. Now, a special place is going to be ordained and established for them to come commune with him, worship him, for his glory to dwell among them and be seen, and for them to be presented with the truths of God and to bring them together. Now, later on, one day, there's going to be a permanent, specific place set up for that. But now they are still a people of nomads. They still have to go through that whole conquest experience that God has foretold for them. And so they need a place that can move, that can go with them, that can be carried with them and be among them. And so God's going to give them the design and plans for the tabernacle. We'll look forward to that over the next couple weeks. I'm excited about it. It's a major part of the book of Exodus and the establishment of their relationship in this new order of things. Throughout the book of Exodus, we've called out several different events that were just new. Moses and talking to God at the burning bush, this reunification of God and man, the giving of God's name to Moses. These are all firsts in human history. God himself said, "By my name Jehovah was I not known to them." I've talked to Abraham, but he didn't know me the way you're about to know me. This is a different thing. This is a change in my dealings with mankind. And now it's happened again. God is taking for himself this nation, as he's prophesied already, but now he's going to become part of their governance, of their management. They are going to become the theocracy that they should be. And he's establishing that order of things among them, not because that relationship is permanent, but because it's going to typify many of God's dealings with mankind. And we're going to see, as New Testament believers who are able to read the back of the book and see the things that God has done, we're going to see so many pictures of Christ, his sacrifice, and how God ordained all things to make him preeminent. We're going to close with a word of prayer for today. We'll take some time away, and then we'll get into the morning worship service.